Hi there, friend. Thank you so much for listening to this episode with me and Colonel Blake Glass. I wanted to let you know that after 20 years of friendship, I missed a detail. I said the country Afghanistan when I meant to say Iraq. So I want to apologize to Colonel Blake Glass, all of his friends, colleagues, and family members that might be listening in, because I know that this was a historic moment in all of your lives for Colonel Blake to complete these tours. And I do want to apologize for saying the wrong country and let all the listeners know of the correct country. It should be Iraq, not Afghanistan. So thanks for tuning in.
Yeah.
Welcome to Avant-Garde Entrepreneur. I am so glad you're here today with me, my friend. Around here, we are all about helping global change makers like you build the sustainable social enterprise of your dreams that impacts thousands, is profitable, and leaves you with something left of yourself at the end of the day. Social entrepreneurs often work in high pressure environments, whether that's post or current wartime nations, in situations where there's domestic violence and also current or past trauma. So you may get calls in the middle of the night for help, and you often vacillate between this like feeling like on fire because you want to do something and then also helpless. You lose people you love because of a lack of access to medical care. You care so deeply for the people that you serve, and most times when something is wrong, there's nothing that you can do. Some of you work with overcoming addictions, with people overcoming addictions. And in many cases, the drugs were forced upon them. It was not a choice that they made. And some of you work in nations at war, and you never know who's going to show up or not for work because something could have happened to them. And you also live with the awareness that your home or your office could be bombed. My friend, if you live and work in a high pressure environment, this episode is for you. There is a gap in the discussion about leading in high pressure situations. And we have an incredible resource in our wartime leaders. These wartime leaders not only are heroes who defend our borders so that the rest of us can sleep soundly, but they also have knowledge, tactics, and strategies that carry over into the civilian business world, especially for entrepreneurs serving in nations that are currently at war or in hostile environments or where people are living in abusive and toxic homes. Today, I am incredibly honored to introduce you to my friend and a wartime hero who is here to share about his experience leading during high pressure situations. Colonel Blake Glass is a decorated military officer who served 28 years in the U.S. military. When I first met him at the University of Florida, where we're in the same MBA program, he just returned from being one of the first companies into Afghanistan. And I say company because I'm not talking about a company like a business company. I'm talking about a company in terms of military. He went on to get a master's degree in strategic studies from the U.S. Army War College. And he was most recently stationed in Ukraine, where he cultivated the vision, values, and leadership and discipline for the employment of an infantry brigade combat team, an enterprise comprised of almost 4,400 people and 638 million US dollars worth of equipment. He strategically planned, integrated, coordinated, synchronized, and led operations in extremely volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments. To say the least, Colonel Glass knows a thing or two about the ups and downs you've experienced, and he's here to smooth the path for us. Colonel Glass, thank you so much for your service and for being here today. Colonel Glass, tell us about yourself. Where did you grow up? What was your early career like?
So I grew up, I'm Floridian, and I think sixth or seventh generation Floridian. So I grew up in Florida. Home is Gainesville, Florida for me. Didn't spend a lot of time there though. And I've lived everywhere from Central Florida, North Florida, South Florida, a little bit of time in Dallas as well, all around the Florida area. And I call Gainesville home.
So you grew up in mostly around Gainesville, you call Gainesville home. Tell us about kind of how you got into the military and you're mixing up how you mixed up being in school and being in the military as well?
I come from a military family, and you find that's very common even today's military. It can be a family business. A lot of our recruits that join had or have had a family member that has served in some degree. But my father was in the Air Force, my brother was in the Army, my grandfather was in the Army, my other grandfather served 30 years in the Coast Guard. And so I would say being a service member is something that the people in my family have been proud of.
Mhm.
And so it was ingrained in me from the very beginning of my life. And that's my dad grew up as a Coast Guard brat, and it really focused him on what he wanted to do. Like I said, he went into the Air Force. But one day, and I think I was 5, I have a picture of it actually. I walked in and dressed up like a soldier and told my parents that I was going to join the army. And I honestly have not looked back from that goal as a 5-year-old.
That's amazing. A lot of people talk about things that they thought they were going to do when they're 5, but very few people actually do it. That's incredible.
Yes, the Top Gun came out. For a little while, I
Oh,
wanted to
yeah.
fly planes
Mhm.
because it looks pretty awesome movie. But I was born to be a soldier. So
Yeah.
in high school, I had the chance to join junior ROTC, and it was Army ROTC, and that refocused me back onto my Army career. And so
Mhm.
I went to University of Florida on an Army scholarship to get my degree, and then was able to get commissioned from there going into the Army.
It's amazing. So, a lot of the listeners have not been in the military. They might have had some military experience because some countries require, as you know, people to go and serve compulsory military. But a lot of listeners haven't. So, you've grown up in the military, basically. What are some of the leadership qualities that you would say are necessary in a wartime environment that may or may not be as necessary when you're basically in a situation where there's more peace involved?
Yeah, that's a great question, Trisha. It is about, and I might say this 2 or 3 times, sets and reps. And I equate it to when you go to the gym, or if you're a sports athlete where you spend hours and hours practicing, that's the same way. And then you have game day where your muscle memory kicks in. And so if you're putting the sets and reps into building yourself and building your team as a leader, when you're in situations that are not as intense or high pressure, you're building actually muscle memory and skills, and you're building ways to communicate with your team and the people around you when you're in these intense situations. But I would definitely say there is a couple things that are important. Number one is remaining calm, which is a very difficult thing to do because it's difficult to hide emotion on your face and to not display that, or even be nonverbal cues that can be read from the people around you. It's okay to be scared, but it's necessary to remain calm. And that will just go a long ways into calming everybody else that's with you and allowing everybody to take, I don't want to say the pause to think, because sometimes in these situations, there's not a lot of time. So that's where I would say the second characteristic is decisiveness. You need to make decisions, and you usually need to make them rapidly. And I will tell you, you'll not always make the best decision. When you look back on a situation where you're in a high pressure situation, you may think to yourself, wow, I wish I would have done this a little bit differently. The outcome may have been different. Done X instead of Y. The death of being in a high tempo or high pressure situation is failure to make a decision. If you pause, if you're indecisive, if you're any of those, then it becomes detrimental to whatever objective or task or leadership role you're in. If you're not doing anything, then things are getting worse. And so I tell people, be decisive, make a decision. It may not be the best, but it's better than not making a decision.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense because even if you don't make a decision, that's still making a decision to to do to do nothing, which can often turn out worse. Obviously, this kind of processing isn't going to happen when you're in the middle of a battle. But let's say someone on your that you're responsible for, let's say they made a decision. They were decisive, they did what you said, and it turned out to be that there was a better decision that could have been made. Or maybe you're just glad that they were decisive, but they doubt themselves for the decision that they made. How do you guide them or counsel them so that they can basically move past that, move past any guilt that was associated with that?
I understand your question, and it's difficult, especially with young leaders that are growing up and getting their feet wet. And I relate a lot of my leadership, I would say, lessons because I'm usually talking to a younger generation. The military is just set on developing it's a leadership factory, and we're set on developing a framework. As a brigade commander, my role was to establish a framework for leadership development. But I say what you hear on TV, you got to have a short memory. You quarterback throws an interception, he's off the field. He doesn't sit over there and dwell on what has happened. He needs to refocus and think about what's next. And so, as a teacher, as a coach or a mentor, as a strategic leader with leaders underneath you that have had a situation where they're questioning it, it's your responsibility and role to go over there and coach them and say, hey, you with the information that you had, you made the best decision possible. And here, look, if you sit here and dwell on it, you're not going to be ready for the next play. We need to get you refocused. And we need you and your people need you looking forward. You don't have time to look backwards. So that's the advice that I would give. That it's good to look backwards when you have the time and say, hey, what we call an after action review, but a chance to look back at what happened, why it happened, and what you could have done differently. That's how we grow. We grow by making mistakes and by having setbacks. But we also need to grow by encouraging resilience in our leaders when they're put in tough situations to let them know that they made the best decision with the information possible, and that was what was good, not sitting there waiting.
I like that, developing resilience. And I think that's a great way to do it, to encourage them, to keep them going.
Leaders have to be resilient. You're going to have setbacks and you're going to have losses. And like we were just discussing, you learn from those and then you use it to move forward. And by the way, being a resilient leader, that characteristic is showing to the people that you're leading to that they can recover and that we can all move forward. So you're modeling the resilience to the people in your team, and that's having an effect on them as well.
Absolutely. One of the things you talked about early on, you didn't use this term, but I talk about managing your emotions. You talked about not letting your emotions show too much, keeping your composure. I think that was kind of what you talked about. I know that you're calm. I've known you for a long time. You're cool as a cucumber. But I know that as a human, we all get angry. We all get frustrated. Things happen. So what do you do to manage your own emotions in these intense situations where you really have to hold your team up? Is it something that you've just developed over time that you don't even know that you do it anymore, or is it very intentional?
I think you have to make it intentional. So I'll go back to situations where I have not held my emotions together and I have not held them in check. And through that review process, I was unhappy with the way I may have performed or the way my team saw me. Mm-hmm. And so I made this intentional decision that, the next time I'm going to take a deep breath. There's, a lot of stress relieving techniques out there, that involve just taking a couple deep breaths. Again, we talked about being decisive. So I'm not saying, go take a 10-minute time out and think about everything that you have going on. But it is okay to turn around, collect yourself, sort of wipe the emotion expression off your face, talk to yourself, remind yourself that you're confident, that you have this, that people are relying on you, and then turn back around and face the situation at hand.
I like that. That's great advice. Really good advice. Let's go a little bit deeper and talk about injustice, the things that you see that just make you sick. we have a global audience, so I don't want to say that anything is bad in one country that's not in another, but there are certain things that we rules of humanity that I think most of are expected to engage in. And you've certainly been in situations where the rules of humanity do not seem to apply to the citizens who live in that country. How do you process injustice, that stuff that just kind of makes you sick to your stomach whenever you see it happening?
Yeah, that's another great question, Tricia. It is difficult. There is a world of injustice around us. There's a world of heartbreak. There are things that are happening in our own country, but around the world that just crush your soul. And we all are going to be in a situation where we see that or a part of it. Maybe it's on the news, or maybe it's something you see in person. And for me, I'll just be 100% honest. I learned this in Iraq in 2003. I had to fall back on my faith. I don't know what God's all-knowing plan is. He does not wake up and he does I do not wake up and he does not share it with me
Mm.
every morning. I think everyone needs to, dig deep into the soul, and what do you believe in? What brings you peace? What brings you comfort? For me, it's my faith. And so that's what I fall back on. Again, it doesn't mean that we're turning a blind eye to it. We're not empathetic or sympathetic about it. And as a matter of fact, if it's immoral, illegal, or unethical, then, what is your response going to be? Sometimes you're in a position where you can respond. And so for me, those are the three things that I always sort of take a look at is what I'm seeing immoral, unethical, or illegal. And then is there an ability for me to respond in that situation? And responding may be reporting it, or responding may be intervening in it as well. But then sometimes you're just seeing the byproduct of decisions that have already happened that were immoral, unethical, or illegal. And now you're dealing with the repercussions of somebody else's decisions. And that's where it's difficult, because you have to have something, I believe, that you feel is a higher calling, higher purpose that will help you process these type of things. I can't say that you can make sense of them, because there's many that I haven't made sense of. And so those are reasons why we have people out there in non-government organizations like Doctors Without Borders serving. That's why we have people, whether it's the United States of America serving their host country, our country, or a country in South America, whether it's in a military role, a governmental role, some type of bureaucratic role. There are a ton of people out there who feel a sense of calling to serve. Those are the people that are out there making a difference. And hopefully those are some of the ones we're talking to today, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
That
I would
just
say so.
need this encouragement that these things happen around the world. They're not fair. And so we need people with these leadership skills that are willing to step in and intervene, or just help recover, right?
Mhm.
There's healing, processes that have to happen, as well. We were talking a little bit about leadership in high pressure situations, or dealing with high pressure situations. And so one of the things I always say is you have to stop the killing,
Mhm.
stop the bleeding, and then start the healing. And hey, I
Mhm.
wish I could take credit for that. I can't. Heard it from other people. Obviously, I'm speaking of some type of physical crisis situation. And it doesn't have to be wartime or combat. This could be auto accident, or we whatever's causing the danger, whatever's causing the harm. We have to stop that. That's stop the killing. Then we have to triage the immediate effects of that, and that's stopping the bleeding, or we're going to continue to have a lot of pain and suffering. And once we can triage the results of that, then that's the hard part of starting the healing. How do we
Yeah.
recover, and how do we make sense of a situation like this? So I hope that answers your question. A little long-winded.
No, no, that's fantastic. And I hope that it's really encouraging to the listeners, because for a 28-year veteran of the military, a U.S. Army colonel, is for you to recognize the value of starting the healing and the role that all of us have to play in injustice. You're there on the front line. And for someone of your stature to talk about the role of organizations that are there for the healing is huge. So I think that that's very encouraging to the listeners.
as well. Yes, me too.
Yeah. I'm going to take everybody a little bit down, a little bit farther, but then we're going to start coming back up. Losing is a part of life. It's a part of life for all of us. How do you respond? You talked about it a little bit earlier, but I want to talk a little bit more about how you respond when you've lost in a battle.
Yes. Um, so losing is not fun.
Mhm.
Losing is painful. And honestly, depending on the situation, if we're talking about a combat situation, it can be extremely heartbreaking because it could be deaths or injuries to anybody, civilians on the battlefield, soldiers on either side. And so I have had plenty of my fair share of losses, um, probably more losses than wins. And so I say that for me, I go back to let's do a quick evaluation of where we're at and how we got here. What could we have done? But then let's move forward and figure out, okay, how do I gain back what I've lost? Or how do I turn this disadvantage into an advantage?
Mm.
And so that is where you refocus yourself, refocus your team, and accept that losses are where you learn and grow. And then you take that information, you take that knowledge, and then you try to convert it into an advantage for you for the next situation that you are going to be presented with. It sounds easy, right? I mean, it's just like, what do you do? You shake it off and live to fight another day. These are easy things to say, but you have to go back to a little bit about what we were talking about a few minutes ago. There can be a lot of deep-seated emotion into putting a lot of effort and time into some type of activity, agenda, objective, and not getting the outcome that you expected. And that's where we're talking about these losses. So easy to tell you to re-engage and make it an advantage, but where it's difficult is the emotional side. And how are you going to heal? How are you going to heal your team? How is everybody, going to shake this off? And so it's interpersonal skills, I believe, empathy, sympathy, listening. Today, we have so many people that hear, but I'm not sure are listening to other people. I would say that's where allowing, your team or the organization you're with to spend a few minutes dwelling on it, talking about it. Don't make it a sympathy show.
Mhm.
At some point, okay, we're done. Everybody's expressed their emotions. Let's let's turn this around and figure out how we're going to move forward.
That is brilliant advice. Whenever we talk about whenever I first asked the question, I don't think that was an easy one to answer. And so for me to hear you talk about taking what you have, the experience, and how are we going to turn it into an advantage, I think that that's a missing piece that not a lot of people understand. So that's very practical and tangible advice. And I also see too how it's important to let people express themselves, but to keep them from getting down too far, to keep them from spiraling too far. Like just get enough out on the table and then let's move forward. I
Yes,
like that. It's
yes.
great advice.
It can quickly spiral out of control, and when it does, finger pointing starts happening, blaming starts happening. If
Mhm.
you're in a situation where that's happening, you just need to bring it to a halt. Insert yourself as the leader, separate everybody, and then move forward.
When you're in high pressure situations, you talked about this earlier, you don't necessarily have a lot of time to decide. You can't take a 10-minute timeout. Most of us have the ability to take a 10-minute timeout because I talk all the time about the importance of not making rash decisions, tuning into your spirit, having a dedicated amount of quiet time or dedicated quiet time so that you can hear. This is not that. This is when things are really bad and things are happening around you. How do you decide what to do when you don't know what to do?
So, Trisha, I would say all those things that you just mentioned, tuning in your spirit, having quiet time, we call these running estimates. But for a couple situations, for the most part, where I'm leading in a high pressure situation or an intense situation, it wasn't that I woke up that day and just walked into a crazy situation.
Mm.
There were indicators, there were signs that, something may be amiss. It's easy, right, to obviously equate this to some type of combat situation where you're in a hostile environment. Of course, those are there. So you have this running, and your team should have this running dialogue of what are the facts? What's going on around me? I tell people, and the Army taught me this as well, but we visualize what's going on, then we take time to understand what's going on, then we describe to others what's going on, then we direct, then we lead, then we assess the situation, and we get into this OODA loop of that. And so it's very interesting that is leadership to me, but lead is only one part, and it's the second to last part. So I'll go back to the understanding, the visualization. You're collecting what you know to be facts. Your team's collecting what they know to be facts, and then you're collecting assumptions. And so usually when you get into a situation where it's high pressure, you're gonna if you had all the facts, the decision's easy. You have more assumptions than you have facts. And so it's this process of working with your intuition and gut, but it's with your team and looking at them, trusting and valuing their intuition, trusting and valuing, their observations. It's stacking those assumptions and determining which ones you have the most faith in and making decisions off of that. And so we're constantly talking to ourselves and our teams, asking how we can turn assumptions into facts. Because the quicker I can turn assumption into a fact, the better decision I have, or better chance I have making it a better decision or a good decision.
So, what I heard you say was that whenever you are leading in an intense situation, it's probably rare that you actually don't know what to do because you didn't just wake up in this situation. It was something that you were in, that your team was in. And as a leader, we want to cultivate our teams, cultivate our relationship with our teams. If they're in tune to their intuition, then they're going to be able to help us compile the facts and assumptions, take all the assumptions. You obviously want to work off as many facts as possible, but you're likely going to have more assumptions. So you want to focus on how can we turn those assumptions into facts and make a decision from there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And another misconception is that leaders make all the decisions.
Mhm.
Leaders are responsible for a decision to be made. Leaders are accountable for the decisions that get made. But let me tell you, I am never the smartest person on my team. I know that. I knew that growing up. And so when you're building a team, you find those people that are smart, or you find people that fill gaps. Just going back to a little bit of what we talked about of self-reflection. Like, what are you good at and what are you bad at? And so how am I going to cover those gaps? I'm going to put somebody on the team. I mean, I could be leading a team that has to do with, making sure the internet stays up for a doctor that's, doing surgery in a third world country, but being led through the procedure over here. Like, I'll lead that team, but I'm not making decisions about
Mhm.
servers and switches, right?
Yeah.
The IT guy that I interviewed and made sure was super smart making that decision.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but
Yeah, it is good because we talk about the importance of delegating. And people often think, especially entrepreneurs, typically they were the people that had the most tenacity. And it's not easy to either say you can't do something or you can't do something well, or to feel comfortable enough passing something off to someone else.
I have a chance to talk to several entrepreneurs this summer, which is quite interesting. That is number one. Entrepreneurs hustle, and they start from scratch. It's very common for an entrepreneur to have had several endeavors that have failed before their successful one comes up. And so they are very, very guarded at releasing decision authority
Mhm.
and delegating authority, which is quite opposite from the military. People think they have this huge misconception that a sergeant can look over to a private and say, go jump in that pond, and that private's going to run and do that. So, first and foremost, we all know that we're not going to be asked to do anything illegal, immoral, and unethical.
Mhm.
But second, we operate on decentralized execution. And that's what makes, in my opinion, the United States military one of its very strong factors. So if second lieutenant coming out of college at 21 years old is given the responsibility of a platoon of 35 soldiers, a young man or young woman making sergeant at 20 years old is given responsibility for 4 or 5 soldiers and his or her team. And so we lead with task and purpose. We're
Mhm.
always explaining the purpose of a mission or a task that we're giving, because you get better results. And also, a lot of times you may not necessarily accomplish the task, but if you fulfilled the purpose, we
Mhm.
still consider that successful. I know it took a little bit of a round, took a branch on what we were talking about, but I thought it was maybe important to talk about that giving purpose is something that helps in situations when you're a leader. I always like to talk about the misconception that in the Army, we just tell you to jump and you say how high. Yeah,
It's not like
you know,
TV, but
yeah,
it's not like it is on
it's
TV.
but let me tell
Yeah.
you, when you are in a high pressure situation, sometimes you'll just lead with tasks because you don't have time for purpose.
Mhm.
But have you cultivated trust in your team before that situation that if you give a directed task and don't have time because of a situation to potentially explain the entire purpose, uh, then the chances are they're going to go execute, and chances are they're going to know your intent anyways from the interactions that they've had with you along the way.
That's a really good point because if you get to whenever you're working with a team, if they're working with you and they're still there because people have a choice, they know your intention and they know your heart. So as long as you communicate with them when you're in a situation where you don't have time to explain, they're more likely going to do it and do it well.
Yes, you build
Yeah.
trust.
Yeah.
You've built trust
Yeah.
that they trust you and you trust them. It's mutual trust, and those are what will get you through those type of situations that we've been talking about today.
You mentioned that you worked with a lot of entrepreneurs over the summer. Are there some things that you see that are, whenever you've talked to the entrepreneurs, that you felt like, I know that you are the most non-judgmental person I know, but are there things that you see when you talk to entrepreneurs, or as you also, I know that you're also in the corporate space as well, that you feel like are sort of missing or could be done better?
Yes, yes. First of all, I've had the chance, like I said, to talk to several of them this during this past summer, and I got a lot from them. These are risk takers, and I'm not talking like extreme risk takers. They do a lot of calculation in their risk, but they have vision and hope, and they have what it's just unique ability to see past all the reasons why I shouldn't and build something that they can. And so it's been really encouraging, especially to talk to young people that have these great ideas and that are out there. But I will say, as you build your team and you're building an organization, whether it's a non-for-profit or for-profit business, there comes a point where you can't do it all. And that is where they're burning themselves out, because they made the decisions to begin with. They feel that they know what the vision is, and so they feel they're the only ones qualified, as they're building a team around them to make decisions. And so I tell many of them that to go back to the visualize, describe, visualize, understand, describe, direct, lead, assess. Like, you have a vision. Have you shared it? Or are you letting your team know what that vision is? As it changes, are you updating them on that vision? Are you describing to them what you see this business, this culture, this organization looking like, 1 year and 5 years down the road? Because if you are, then you're first getting buy-in by them if they're staying, because they're sharing your vision. And then you should be able to let go of and delegate. We talked about delegate. Look, you're not going to give away, every task, or you're not going to give away all authority. But I see a lot of entrepreneurs, they want to give people in their organization responsibility, but they don't want to give them the authority that goes with that responsibility.
Mm.
That's a recipe for inefficiency, and a broken team. If you're going to give someone responsibility, then you need to also give them authority. And again, it's determined by you how much authority, but it's sort of got to be commensurate with the amount of responsibility they're giving them. So if I'm giving a subordinate team member a task to do something and run a small team, am I also giving them the ability to, use company funds up to a certain level, whatever it is? To go back to your question, they don't want to delegate, and it's because I feel that they haven't shared their vision. And then the mistake I see is, even when they do try to share responsibility, they don't share that authority as well. And so that can make it very difficult.
I agree. And I think it's so interesting that you bring this is what you see after 20 years of working in the military, being in that environment, and then also working with entrepreneurs. It's interesting that the things you see are certainly the biggest challenges that I see as well. And that's really important too, not just delegating, but giving them authority equal to their responsibility that you give them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the things that I always like to ask leaders, and I am really interested to hear your response to this. How do you compress or recharge? Because you also have a family. So it's not like you live in this, I don't want to call it a bubble of the military, because it would be a ginormous bubble, but you don't live in an environment where it's not structured all the time. You go back to a life with your wife and your children. So how do you find time to kind of balance and decompress and recharge from being in an intense situation to home life?
That's a good question too, Trisha. One of the benefits I have is a little bit of a long drive. Not, there's probably people that think my 45-minute to an hour drive is not long at all, that are probably driving 2+ hours home at night. So I have a small amount of time by myself in the car that I can self-reflect, and I can think about what happened for the day. And I personally use that to sort of first shut off these negative emotions or negative feelings that may be on top of me after a difficult day, whether it be disappointment or anger or even heartbreak, right? Or something that may have happened to somebody, and to reset my emotions as I walk into the door of my house. For me, I have two young boys. I have a 9-year-old Jacob, and he's almost 10, and a 4-year-old Charlie, who's almost 5. And I can decompress with those two boys very easily. Living here in Florida, like, we're in the pool all the time. Playing games. And so, like, I don't even have to, I just have to put my bathing suit on and jump in, and they're right behind me.
Mhm.
So right now I just spend a lot of time with my family. You hear from, your grandparent or your parents and people that have had kids that now out of school, and how quickly the time goes. And then I have missed a lot of time because of the military. And so I value every minute I can get, and try to spend it with them. So really, right now, that's my decompression, and my wife as well. But she gets a decompressed when me and the boys,
Yeah.
decide to play basketball in a driveway, or we have a great dog who loves to swim with us and play chase and frisbee, and I just spend time with them. That quality time, to try to model some behaviors. and to listen and build trust with them, and then putting them to bed, and then spending some time just asking my wife how her day went and giving her the opportunity to decompress, or share as well. Other things though I like to do, I love being outside. So we have a small farm in North Florida, Pine Farm, and we can go out there and ride four-wheelers and hunt and fish. And of course, I take the boys with me and the
Mhm.
dog. So I like to share that with them as well. Yeah. So it's important to have some avenue for clearing your mind and clearing your soul and hitting that reset button. We talked about injustices, we talked about losses, we've talked about even wins. They all come with emotional ups and downs, and you don't know when you're going to be in that high pressure situation. It can be a call in the middle of the night, and so it's always good to be in a situation where you're neutral
Yeah.
before engaging into a high stakes, high pressure situation. And so people need to take that time, and whatever it is, whatever brings joy in your life, seek it out and make sure that you schedule time for it. I'm going to talk to my entrepreneurs out there again. You put everything in your calendar because you have very busy lives and a lot to do. Well, schedule your personal time and protect it and block it off, because you can't go 24/7 all the time.
Okay, did you guys hear that? Schedule the time, block it off. If you make appointments for everyone else, why don't you make appointments for yourself? So important.
And
Thank you for sharing
turn
that.
off your phone during
Yes, turn off your
during that
phone.
time.
Yes,
Do not,
yes,
I read a great thing the other day that our phones should be servient to us as tools. They should not be lords over us.
yes.
And so your phone is a tool. You control it. You can put it down and spend time doing whatever that brings you joy.
That one's definitely going to be a quote. I have like, I don't know, quotes for the next 3 years from you, Colonel
Oh,
Glass, but that one's definitely
well, I
going to be a
hope.
quote that goes out.
Yeah, a lot of them. So let's just put a disclaimer. Probably none of them are mine.
Yeah, it wasn't that the
There's
way it goes.
something I read or saw in a podcast or a book somewhere along
Yeah.
the way. So
Well,
I will not take credit for any of them, but I do not know who said them.
well, we know that we all need human filters. So you're a great human filter, someone who's assimilated a lot of information and given it to us in a way that's meaningful. So before I ask my last question, how do
Yeah,
people find and connect with you, Colonel Glass?
yeah. So a great way is just to find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I have it's Blake Glass on LinkedIn. I don't know if if you share a URL or
Yes, I'll
anything like
link it.
that.
I'll link that in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So a
Okay.
great way to find me is on LinkedIn. I've really discovered the power of LinkedIn this summer as I, work on a potential transition out of the military. And so I've been building my network, and I've had a lot of great interactions because of that. And so yeah, I've had some experiences to just be at some chamber events. I've had experiences to talk to some interns this summer. I love any conversation anybody wants to have about leadership, how you build a leadership development program, how you cultivate leaders in your organization. I have some knowledge on that, I feel,
I think so. I
and
think so.
I feel that it needs to be not an afterthought.
Mhm.
It needs to be a forethought. And I tell people in my organization in the Army, right, the person replacing you should be able to fight tonight, right? So
Mm.
you have already built them up. They need to be ready to take your job tonight. And you need to found the person that's going to replace that person, and that's the one you're teaching, coaching, or mentoring. Too many people are worried that the person right behind them is going to take their job, and you can't be worried about that. In fact, I tell people it's a measure of success if the person you have that you're training up to replace you is ready to go, then you have done what you needed. And so, and I also tell our leaders out there, you're not setting the conditions for the person to replace you. You're setting the conditions for the person that replaces the person who's replacing you.
Mhm.
If you're thinking only 1 year down the road, your competitors, your adversaries, they're thinking a lot further down the road,
Mm.
5, 10, maybe even 30 years down the road when we look at some of these large hegemonic nations that are out there. So, what are you doing to set the conditions for success in your organization, not for the person behind you, but for the person behind the person behind you?
I'm going to amend what I teach then, because I talk about pouring into the person that's cultivating your team, but I have never thought about the value of not just being the person that you're training behind you, but the person under them. That's amazing.
Yeah, you're not giving up on the person behind you.
Mm.
But the goal is that you have long ago found that person, you've been cultivating that person to step into your role. And so now are you seeking out, the person that's going to replace them? Because that's when you have a lot of opportunity to influence in a positive way their learning and allow that person to be a part of your strategic team, or at least invited in on parts of your strategic team when it's appropriate. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you one last question, Blake.
Yeah.
So sorry,
Yeah.
Colonel Glass. I've known you as Blake for a long time. I knew I was going to slip at least once, if not
Okay.
more
It's
times.
okay.
So you've had this incredible military life as well as professional life and a family life. And you're so young and you've got so many brilliant ideas. What's next on the horizon for you?
So as we were talking a little bit, I'm definitely moving into the private sector
Mhm.
as I transition out of the military. Right now I'm taking a job with Pulte Homes, but I still have a passion for helping and growing leaders. And so I see some way staying involved in that. Like I said, whether it's just coming and speaking to a junior ROTC class at a high school, or whether it's coming to an organization and talking about a general or a very specific subject, I want to share a lot of what I've experienced and learned to our growing leaders out there that are going to replace us one day, right? So I appreciate you saying I'm very young, but let's say
We
I'm
don't
closer to
always feel
retirement.
young, but
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
yeah.
And so we have some great people out there that are just thirsting for knowledge and these conversations and tips. And, if I can be a conduit to, just share a little bit about what I know, or at least what I think I know, then that's something I want to continue to do as well. To answer your question, hopefully, there may be something else in the works as I go through this transition, where I can, apply those skills as well.
Well, you remember us whenever you're famous.
Uh, I Sure. I'm
Oh.
not the one that just got a book published, so I mean,
You probably have one in you though.
yeah.
Oh
Oh, yeah,
man.
all the wrong things to
How
do. How not to do it. Yes.
not to do it.
Yes.
Well, I can't
Um,
imagine the future you have in, I mean, I know that you basically coach as a leader, you're basically coaching all the time, but you have so much to share, especially with entrepreneurs. All the things that you talked about, for you having that outside perspective is so important, because these are the things that we talk about all the time. And for you to come with an outside perspective is
it's it's
huge.
it's been I've had a really interesting and fulfilling career. And as I sort of focus of who your, as we were talking, who your audience is and stuff, like, everywhere I've been, like, we talked about it, the healing part. Like,
Mhm.
the military's not good at the healing part, as in we're not going to be around.
Mhm.
We're good at stopping the killing. We'll start the stopping the bleeding, but if it's going into a country, whether it be Kenya or Djibouti. I have just got to work with these great organizations around the world. I mentioned Doctors Without Borders, but the Red Cross, I can't think of them, but they, even here on the domestic side, when we have a hurricane, in the state, FEMA or just the volunteers that come out. So that has been the interesting part of my journey, is that you really partner with these other organizations. Sometimes it's their governmental
Mhm.
organizations, like USAID or something of that nature, or private business. But a lot of times it's what we call NGO, right? A non-government organization. And it's usually, some people volunteering their time. And I say collectively, the world relies on these type of organizations to do a lion's share of the difficult work out there when it comes to solving injustices, not solving, but what would be the term? Whatever,
Addressing
reducing
or yeah,
injustices, yeah,
yeah.
addressing
Mhm.
injustice in the world, because there's plenty of it to
Mhm.
go around. What I love about the military, it's a factory.
Yeah,
There's so many great leaders. I
yeah.
can't take credit for half of what I've been taught,
Mhm.
because or what I've done, because there is somebody above me pulling and somebody below me pushing the whole
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's
So,
the model for how business can be. And so you're pulling and pushing entrepreneurs in whatever comes in your next chapter. So that's
yeah.
amazing. Colonel Glass, Blake, thank you so much. I can't think of, I don't know anyone who is more qualified to talk about not just leading, but leading in intense situations. And I love how you've always been so practical, and I love that you've not lost that about yourself, even after nearly 3 decades in the military. You just have such a great balance. You're one of the least polarizing people I know, and yet you have had so much responsibility. And I love how you blend your family life and your life outside the military and your professional life outside the military with all of your experience. So thank you, gosh, so
Thank
much
you.
for
I
being here.
appreciate it. Yeah,
Welcome.
thank you. I really appreciate it, Tricia. It's been a great afternoon to spend with you and talking.
Thanks.